Good afternoon, and good afternoon to my executive support group, and I want to thank Scott Solkoff, elder law attorney, for the use of his conference room as he has done week after month to allow us to bring a support group to the viewing public. And today we'll be discussing the value of a support group from people that have been attending and being an active participant for many, many years. At the end of the show, we're going to begin to have some understanding as to how you, no matter where you are, can start a support group for the benefit of what you as a family caregiver may need, even if you're not all dealing with the same disease, or even if you're not dealing in similar circumstances. You'll begin to hear from people that are doing it and are part of a very active Wednesday support group here in South Florida, the value as they see it, why they continue to be a part of it, and what they think they can bring to you so that you can benefit from what a support group does. So, good afternoon. Thank you for being here. And Marion, all right. Glad to see you here today.
Thank you.
All right.
And when I can't make it, I really miss it.
All right. Well, now that we have your beautiful face on film, we can move forward. As you know, what we're trying to do here is not only benefit the local area, but to begin to show folks around the country, if not around the world, how important support groups are to caregivers, kind of how you got started in it, and then I'll try and finish up with, from somebody who has created support groups, how I think one might go about doing it, even if you don't have a population as close together as we do of people with similar illnesses and of a similar mind. So with that thought in mind, I'll go back to you, Mary.
I remember very clearly how I found out about the support group. It was by chance. I was playing canasta with a woman who was subbing for someone else. And I mentioned the subject that my husband had some kind of dementia. I don't know what it was. And I was so frustrated. And he called me on the phone several times while I was playing the game. And I saw the stress I was under. The woman said she had a husband with Alzheimer's. And she went to this meeting with this great leader named David. And she offered to pick me up the next Wednesday morning, which she did, drove me to the location. And I found very nurturing people. I found a comfort in people with very similar problems, although most of the people here have spouses or loved ones with Alzheimer's, and my husband doesn't have that, but he has, I have a lot of the same issues as then a caregiver and now a care advocate, as he's in a nursing facility. And the comfort of being able to talk from my heart about the stress I was under, the difficulty of getting him to agree to go to a nursing home. He never really agreed, but he got ill, and from the hospital he went to rehab and so on. But what I find very heartwarming is that we are different people here. Some have spouses in facilities, some spouses have passed away, but they still feel that they get value from coming, and so they make the effort. And I think for anybody, whether you're dealing with cancer, whether you're dealing with Parkinson's, look, the Italian stallion is here. I think there's any situation where you can be with people with like problems and help each other is always a healthy thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Marion, I think you really put that one together very, very well. And I want to remind our audience that every disease and disability that an individual has, somewhere there's a caregiver. And it really doesn't make a difference what the age of the person that's suffering, the age of the person who's a caregiver. You can have parents with special needs children just as you have 80-year-old spouses taking care of 80-year-old spouses. So that caregiving really is a role that you are put into, and the circumstances that you encounter are unique to that role, unique to your relationship to the person, and a whole myriad of other things. Finances, geography, how close are you, do you have siblings, do they agree on what's being done, etc., etc. And so, in looking at a support group, one of the things that I think we see most often, and Herb, I'll ask you for your comment next, is that we see people that come into a group for the first or second time, and they really are like a duck out of water. They don't know what to do, what to expect, and I think that anybody in a support group anywhere really doesn't know what the benefit is going to be, and most times they're not sure why they were even there in the first place, but usually it's a well-intended friend, neighbor, family member who said, I'm going, why don't you come along with me? Or I heard about a group and maybe you ought to give it a try because I see how much stress you're under and the problems that you're trying to deal with. Maybe you'd benefit from listening to how others do it. Herb, you got a comment on that?
Yeah, well, it's kind of strange because I grew up in an environment where my father being an immigrant, and he always maintained that you had tremendous amount of strength within the family unit and that you took care of all kinds of problems, and you did it alone and you did it privately. You didn't try to bring in other people. So when I was faced with all of a sudden a situation where this thing became overwhelming, my wife having dementia and losing her ability to recall certain items, things that were happening, or to perform certain tasks, I felt that I could cope with it by myself. And I did for a while. And when I began to try to do some research about this whole thing, finding out what it entails, I realized that, well, I didn't even know where to turn. First of all, I didn't know the word dementia, and I didn't know what it meant, as most people don't. And I certainly didn't know what the word Alzheimer's meant. That was always somebody else and somebody else's family. Eventually what happened with us is that my wife was supposed to pick up our grandchildren in an after-school activity, and she at a location where she had worked. And she was confused to both the time and the place and how to get there. And this was a grandchild who was 4 years old and another one who was 6, a brother and sister. And it was my son who really suggested that we better get my wife tested, and I did. And that then suggested, because of the testing facility, that maybe I would benefit from going to a support group. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. I mean, first of all, I'm not ready to open up and be honest about feelings and emotions and all the rest of what goes with that.
All that girly stuff.
Yeah, all that girly stuff. Yeah, I mean, this is, and my background is engineering. Well, engineers are supposed to be in control of what's going on, specifically in control. After about another 2-3 months went by, I said, okay, I'll go to one session, which I did. And I realized...
Was that just kind of to prove yourself right that you didn't need it?
I knew I was right until I went to the session. And then in telling the circumstances about what had happened, and which took me over to realize that truly Linda had a problem, my wife Linda had a problem. Next thing I knew, as I'm relating the story to this group, I'm in tears. And that was totally out of character. So that full background of Russian power and strength and strong man, you get the Italians. It didn't apply, and fortunately I was sitting next to a couple of people who were very, very sympathetic. And most of the group, a lot of people in the group don't talk, and others who were more understanding were sympathetic, they were empathetic. They directed me towards some publications, and that began the beginnings of attending support groups. As it evolved, and my wife got worse and worse, eventually to the point where she was put into a facility, I realized I needed that support even more than I thought previously.
All right. So
And
that
I ended up coming to your group.
eventually you wound up coming
Yeah,
to the support group that we run on Wednesdays. But I think the interesting point, and I don't think, even though Muriel said girly, excuse me, my dementia. All right. I'm very guilty of that. One of the problems in doing a lot of support groups is a lot of faces, but I
I
apologize.
still call my kids by
Right.
the dog's name, so that's
All
all
right.
right.
But I think the point that we're trying to relate to the folks that are watching is that starting out and going to a support group can be a very difficult first step. Even though logic may dictate that you may be able to gain help, knowledge, and support, the idea of placing your issues in front of others to kind of look at and comment on, because normally, if you have never been to one, and let's say another set of circumstances, if you've been to a grief group because you've lost somebody, or you've been to some a group, let's say like the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, which is more patient-oriented support, because you're dealing with the person who has a particular disease. And one of the things that we make constant comment about is that the reason that I practice non-clinical family caregiving is because family caregiving is not a disease. You can't take a pill to cure it, and you didn't catch it.
The physical side of it was probably the easiest side to deal with. It was overwhelming at times, but always at the
You're
end
talking about your circumstances as a caregiver.
It always, somehow or another, the day ended, and so that was over with.
Right.
But the emotional and the psychological aspects of this whole thing
Never turned off.
never turned off. And what I also realized too, that if I was to gain something from the support of others and their knowledge and their feelings and their motivations and inspirations, I had to be absolutely honest, both with myself and with the group. And it was that which I think made me realize that a support group had so much value to me individually, and probably to my wife as well, because it helped me direct her eventually to a facility, which I was not about to do under any circumstances.
did not want to do that.
And I remember those circumstances as well, as we all do, because this group comes from our Wednesday group, which has been together for quite some period of time. And one of the reasons that they're still together is because one of the advantages of a support group is it's continuing. And there are times when it presents active support to an individual, and there are times that it allows those who have been through the experience to help support others with a perspective and a view that isn't coming out of a book. It's coming out of their life experiences as a caregiver. And you know, there's nothing that replaces the honesty of one caregiver dealing with another, because you just can't pull the wool over anybody's eyes, and we see that when we start with new caregivers. June, what's your perspective on all of this? You've been in group with me now probably 7-8 years at
I
least.
think it's 9.
9? Okay. Well, I remember your name, but I didn't remember the time.
Who was she, by the way?
I called her June, even if it's 8.
Yeah, finally.
Right.
Well, as I came to this group, I came with somebody else that was having a problem. And I came to a class somewhere else, and I met David. And I sat there and I listened. I didn't have any problems at that time at home. And as the years went on, things changed in my life. But I always liked to be there to help everybody else. When the class, anybody came in the class, you had to get a hug. And when you went out, you had to have a hug because everybody's under stress. They're new, they don't know what to talk about. Sometimes they don't want to talk, which is fine. You don't have to talk. You can listen, and then next time you come back, if you feel like talking, you talk. Anyway, as it is now, my husband is in a nursing home. He's doing very well. He has very little dementia, and he's being taken care of very, very well. But my pride is this class, to know that if I feel down today, I can come Wednesday, every Wednesday, and know that everybody in this class is going to help me. There's not going to be one person that's not going to say something to me, including David, of course. But it's just a beautiful feeling that we are all so friendly and caring.
Bonded.
And I will never forget this class the rest of my life. And I hope everybody out there listening comes to it.
And we like seeing
And
you here.
thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
And I think what you're hearing sincerely from the heart, those that are listening, is the value of a caregiver support group is more than just the information being exchanged. Of course, there's a lot of things that my role as a facilitator, to talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts and things like paperwork and how do you evaluate facilities and things like that, which are important. But I think what we're hearing is the underlying message is that the emotional aspect of bringing your caregiver stuff, for lack of a better word, to a group of people that understand, even if they don't understand all of your situation in specifics, all right, but are there to listen, to see how you fit in against what they know and what they can do. And I think, Muriel, you use the correct word when you say it's a bond. And I think it is a very powerful bond.
It's true.
And that...
More than anybody will ever know.
Right, and I think that that's important to understand. This is not just a couple of people getting together to schmooze. You know, it's not like a book club, all right? It deals in people's emotions, it deals in people's reality, and the one thing that's most important, I think, for everybody, not at this table, but anybody listening, it's also a very sacred trust that goes on inside of a support group. What you hear stays there because it's the ability to be able to be open and honest and say how you feel without others sitting in judgment. This is not like sitting around in a canasta or a poker game and talking about things where you're worried about socially somebody looking back at you and saying, oh, I didn't know you were going through that stuff. Wait till I tell my next door neighbor or whatever else it may be. Support groups have the nature of them, and people learn it not because they're being told you can't say anything or what you hear stays here. It almost arises as part of the bedrock of a support group, is that what you're hearing stays with you, and that you can trust the group to take your stuff and deal with it honestly, and not worry that you're going to see it the next day in an email, a Twitter, a tweet, or whatever it may
We
be.
care for each other here.
Yes.
Well, it's family.
Right.
And it's a very unique dynamic
No question.
that creates this kind of a family, because the bond is the word caregiving, and from that arises a cohesiveness that almost defies description as to how it arises, but people become kind of glued to one another and worry about one another and want to make sure that others are okay. And it doesn't always wait till a Wednesday. There's nobody at this table. And one of the things that we do is we circulate a very private list, phone numbers and emails. And so if a caregiver has a problem at 12 o'clock at night, they know they can pick up the phone and call one of the group and say, I'm having a problem, can I discuss it with you? I'm having a problem, what do you think? And it's a very sacred bond.
One of the other things that's kind of interesting is the mix of the people that can or do attend a support group. You have certainly you have differences of educational level, whereas some of the support group members have high school degrees, some don't, I guess. Some have college degrees or master's degrees, but we have backgrounds that are so varied. You find male, of course, and female. You find, in our particular case, we find
Rich and poor,
Rich and
literate and
poor.
illiterate, you know, I mean, it
Right
doesn't
down
make
to
it any.
caregiving, it comes right down to
It boils
caregiving.
down to that.
Right, when you come in and you're wearing your caregiver hat, that's the only credential
Don't
that
care
you
what your
need
background is.
to be
Right.
part of the group. Murray, I'll come back to you in just a
I
moment.
just wanted to say
Yeah.
that what Bernice says when she sends out an email to our Wednesday family, or when we send a card to someone who's ill from the Wednesday family, I think that's a very succinct way of.
Right, well, I think it's a wonderful way of describing. You know, it's not the group, it's the
That's
family.
right, yes.
And I think that word has a very special meaning in the world of caregiving. Not just your own biological or lineal family, but those who you have come to trust and rely upon, and they in turn to you.
I have no family living here locally,
Me either.
and I refer to this group as my second
Yes,
family.
exactly.
That's
Oh,
right,
yes.
Because
absolutely.
they're here.
But I have never heard a word so strong as bond in my life, thanks to you. And it's so apropos for this
It is
class.
very
Right.
It is, it is.
It really is.
And I want the people that are watching out there, or that will be watching, to understand that what we're discussing here is totally unscripted.
Yeah.
Nobody sat down beforehand and said, what are we going to tell the world when we turn on the camera? This is coming straight out as how people feel,
Sincerely.
their emotional responses, speaking from the heart, and without any ulterior motive except to help you, the viewer, understand the value of what these people have available to them through themselves. Not because I facilitate it, all right, but it's because if I were to drop dead right now, that group would go on. Because it's for,
Don't
you
tell me that.
know, but
think so.
I'm simply saying, if I extracted myself from the process, the group
Don't
would
say
have
that.
no difficulty moving forward. Then they have to find another individual that had, you know, some good subject matter expertise, but
Wouldn't be
they
like
would.
you,
No,
David.
It wouldn't-
Never.
well, that's not the point I'm
I
saying.
know it's not the point you're
Right.
saying, however, we all feel that.
Right,
Yes.
but
You
it's
are part of our family.
Yes.
and I'm a caregiver too, so
Yes.
I derive a tremendous amount of comfort.
There's no
If
question.
I can add another dimension to this whole thing, we are also, not only are we dealing with the fact that we are under stress as caregivers, or we're trying to understand how we ourselves are reacting, we do get into, obviously, the individual who we're taking care of, but the amount of, the variety of topics that we discuss is a very significant part of what caregiving groups are all about. And I just want to reiterate a little bit of it. I mean, we talk about, for example, putting someone into a home and all the, what's involved with that. We've talked about some of the aspects and with some degree of authority, but of the aspects of the legal requirements of caregiving and being having power of attorney or being a surrogate. We have talked about topics that relate to having a significant other while still being married to an individual, as we've done. We've talked about so many different things that it just becomes so important that your level of intelligence and knowledge is constantly expanding. Doesn't mean we're always experts in it, but we are at least able
No.
to discuss.
We are learning all the time.
And the thing I can tell you, not in claiming any expertise, but it has been my focus for 25 plus years, is that I learn every day. And I learn from you guys, just as you learn from me. Because everybody brings back to the table, whether it's Wednesday or a phone call or whatever, and people report in during the week and tell me, you know, this is what's going on, can I talk to you about it, or I had a bad day, and I'm no different than anybody else. And it's a tremendous feeling to know
So we have it.
that we have it. I think that
And I think that every
Bernice?
week
I'm sorry.
We'll come
I
back
Yeah,
think
no, I
that-
was just gonna say
okay.
something else, no, it's okay.
I think that every week that we get together, there's always a new
Yes.
problem
Definitely.
or something new, and
we learn.
we are
Yeah.
constantly learning. And I think that's
Well,
You know, when this
it's an
person-
evolutionary process, constantly learning, but yet going back over. How many times, if you stop to think about it, have we had discussions, as Herb pointed out, over documentation? Durable powers of attorney or
Yes.
advanced directives, just to use that as a for instance. And there's something in support groups, and I've mentioned it before, called teachable moments. And many times when you're explaining to somebody, let's just say, why they need certain paperwork, and there's another person that's just concentrating on the issue that they had and they didn't listen. But next week they said, remember last week you were talking about, and so there's constantly this
Back and
going
forth.
back over as well as expanding into the new. And I think that's one of the great things about a support group, as opposed to teaching a class where everybody will be on page 7 and at the end of it there'll be a test and then you get a certificate and you graduate. It is a constant reinforcing, refining process based on the needs of individuals at that moment. All right? Sam. For anybody that's listening, that's Fieri, but the other day I called him Sam, and so I had to go back to doing
I
it.
called him Fiorello. I think we should change his name.
Mr. LaGuardia, please speak.
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I never thought about from the support group that came to me was to be a good advocate. The support group, the ones that made me realize that I should put my wife in a facility. But after that, I really probably at that time had thought, well, I put her in a facility now, like she's not mine. She's not my responsibility anymore. And actually, at this day, I think of it, she's more my responsibility than that. And like today, I'm late because of something I had to do for her. And I got it done.
Right, and I think that's part of that little cliche that we use quite often. Just because you changed the roof doesn't mean you gave up the responsibility. You may have moved from hands-on caregiver to being a very effective advocate on their behalf to make sure that the things that you expect to be done and that you've been promised will be done are being done.
That
One of the
ties
points
in-
that I-
I'm sorry, Muriel. That ties into exactly what I was going to say is what Herb said.
It's a
when-
hard name
when-
to remember.
When the spouse or the loved one goes into facility, your role changes, as you've said, from caregiver to advocate.
Right.
The
What hap-
advocate caregiver.
What
Right.
happened this week is I realized that my husband had not seen the dentist, and they told me a dentist comes every month. So because he's doesn't have Alzheimer's and I can take him out, and so, physically he can't walk, but I took him out with an aide, took him to the dentist. They found severe periodontal, whatever you call it, disease.
Right.
Yeah,
Gum disease.
gum disease. And he's fanatic about brushing his teeth. He's obsessive compulsive, and he has to have 2 toothbrushes at all times and 6 tubes of toothpaste and so on. But somehow he ended up with the periodontal disease, and so I took him back on Thursday, and because they had a cancellation, and he got all the gook that he needed to have put on and so on.
Right.
And but because of his dementia, he's supposed to put something on at night on his gums. He put it on in the morning. But hopefully, as I remind him, because I usually speak to him last thing at night, and I'll say, put on your medicine. But you can't. The best facility, as we have said, has faults. And
You
although
have to be the good advocate. You have to be
and the
good.
podiatrist was supposed to see him for weeks, didn't come. So I was there last Sunday. He asked me to cut his toenails, as you all know, I can't see very well. So I cut by feeling, more or less. He wanted them cut, I cut them.
Is he a diabetic?
No. Later that night, the podiatrist shows up on a Sunday night after I had gone through the dirty work, so to speak. So you have to, be the
So,
advocate.
if I can summarize what you
Please
just
do.
said, that even in a facility, you were dealing with hoof and mouth disease.
I gave him an opening. I gave him an opening.
Right. Sorry, folks, but you have to have a sense of humor and care.
And you have one, that's for sure.
I wanted to make the point that when you first begin to realize that your loved one has a disease, particularly an awful disease like the ones we're dealing with, the Alzheimer's, it's like being thrown into the ocean without a life raft. And you just don't know which way to turn and where to go.
You're floundering.
You absolutely.
Yeah.
And coming into the support group, not only do you get practical help, i.e. paperwork and powers of attorney, and all of that stuff, the emotional support is so valuable. I think all of us probably feel it would have been a lot more difficult getting through these issues
Without the.
if we didn't have each other
I've got to
to
say
turn
this.
to.
I've got to say this, Bureau. For the longest time, from the time I came into this support group, which is a good number of years ago, probably about 5 years or so.
Oh, at least.
I've been
Please,
at least
yeah.
that long also.
From the time I came in, I got the help that I didn't think I needed.
Yeah.
I told everybody, I told David and everyone, my wife does not have Alzheimer's. And I always felt that maybe I didn't belong in the group. A little bit of me felt that way, that maybe I didn't belong in the group because she didn't suffer from Alzheimer's. She had short-term dementia.
And you never mentioned that.
Yes, he did.
I did.
Yes, I did.
What,
Yes, you did.
that she didn't have Alzheimer's?
No, that I remember.
Oh, she did
But
have
I didn't know
short-term
you felt
dementia.
that way.
David knew it also.
Right.
But I also felt, when I listened to people talk, I also felt that my problems aren't as great as the others. And later on I found out as time went on, yes, they were. They were very strong. She had been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and as I said, she had a short-term dementia. But when I came to this group, I had learned so much on how to take care of her. I never, ever entertained the thought of putting her into a facility because I didn't feel she needed it, and because I was fortunate enough to be able to take care of her at home. I had caregivers, aides, not caregivers. I was the caregiver. I was the caregiver. And one thing I learned from being in a caregiver's group is that we have to do things for ourselves. Because if we don't watch ourselves, we're going to wind up ill. We have to take care of
And
ourselves.
sometimes we're not good at that.
No,
No.
but our group
Yes.
helps you face
Oh,
it.
yeah.
And our group has been so important. I come now, my wife has passed, as you all know, over a year ago. I continue coming here, not for the assistance that I need. I really don't need. I have another problem, but I don't need that I don't need the support group for that. But I come here hoping, as those of us who have lost loved ones, that I can help newcomers or even the old timers here.
You are.
And that's why I'm here.
You are helping.
I really want to get some satisfaction when I do speak up, when I do say something that I feel is going to help somebody. And that's the value of a support group, that you just don't stop coming here because your loved one has died.
I think I have a unique situation
You
in that
do,
I'm the
you-
only one that has the experience of having been with the group and without the group. Because up until 2 years ago, I was snowbirding. So I was only down here in the winter, and when I was here, I came religiously every week. I didn't miss a meeting. Then I had to go back up north. And I missed this
It was
group.
like detoxing,
Oh,
huh?
it was.
This group is really something.
So I really had the comparison. I found something up where I live that was, first of all, it was once a month. This was once a week. I went once or twice, and I didn't particularly
Identify with it.
much out of that. And after a while, I just stopped, and I dealt with my situation as best I could. And I couldn't wait to get back to Florida, to get back to this group.
Well,
Get
that's
back to
so
your
good.
family.
That's so good. That's so important. that people who do not have groups to go to, if they possibly can, to start them. They will find in very short order, we'll say, that why didn't we have this before?
Yeah.
They're going to find out how valuable we are to one
And
another.
also, if group number one doesn't work for you, you
Right,
see
don't
what
think-
you can find
Right, don't paint,
another group.
Yes.
right, do not paint all support groups with the same brush.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because, with all due respect, people that facilitate support groups come from every background. There are those that have a heavy clinical background that are always trying to analyze the caregiver. There are those that come from a strong ecumenical or religious background, and while they're very good at what they do, they don't always come with caregiving as a point of expertise. And notwithstanding that there may be a priest, a rabbi, imam, whatever it may be, that caregiving is not intuitive to the point where they have a caregiving gene either. And then it's also a question of the setting. I don't mean the physical setting, but the people you're with. There are many groups that get together and they haven't moved forward from the day they've started. It becomes what we call a pity party. Woe is me. I'm dealing with the same stuff. You got to hear my same story about how tough this week was, and we do want to hear things like that so we can help. But if it's a question of who can outdo whom as to who suffered more this week, then that's not a beneficial aspect of a group. And that's why it takes a good facilitator to help people not wallow in their issues, but to get them out, put them on the table, and let everybody understand and contribute, while a good facilitator tries to make sure that information being shared is accurate and that things that don't come out as complete sentences, so to speak, get completed. And it takes a while when you're starting a group for somebody that wants to lead one or facilitate one to do that. You don't need formal training. I mean, a good facilitator comes from the experience, the background of wanting to share and help, and then they become more expert at the pieces of the issues of caregiving that are important. At least that's been my experience.
I've got to say, if I may, if you finish, I don't want to just
No. Remember, I still got a comment on.
I just wanted to say that before I came to our group, now, I had been in another group which folded because of lack of funds. That was Madame de Hornley's Alzheimer's group. Anyway, we had a facilitator there, very sweet woman. But she really did not have the experience and how to handle a support group. Was the first word that would come out of her mouth when we met. First things, let's say she spoke to me first. She said, "Murray, what did you do for yourself this past week?" That was about the extent of her entering into this conversation. You know, she wanted to know what we did for ourselves.
Not a bad one.
Which is good.
Yeah, but she didn't pursue it anymore, you know, with anyone else. Here we discuss
Yes,
everything
everything.
here, and we really get at it. And she was very good, very nice, but she wasn't the
And we
facilitator.
never have an agenda when we come to a meeting.
No,
We
no.
never
We just-
decide, what are we going to talk about today?
We do.
As it happens.
Yeah.
It's just, it comes out.
Well, you know, and it's similar
It's
to the
easy.
radio show that I do with Paul on caregiving.
Right.
There was a time that I wrote out, the script so he'd know where we were going, and now we meet in the elevator going upstairs.
That's it.
And we say, what are we going to talk about? Oh, and because we're both spousal caregivers, it's an interesting place to start, and then information that gets picked up from the various groups.
That's right.
And all of a sudden, the biggest problem that we've discovered, not enough time.
Yeah.
All right, once you get going, you want to really
Just
keep going. Huh?
expands.
Yeah.
I was going to mention too that, and Murray just briefly talked about it, but we have a certain cadre of people who have been there a while. And the interesting thing is that when we end up with newcomers, we begun to find out that not only are we supporting each other, but we're now beginning to build a new cadre
Drawing them
coming into the. And so obviously we welcome not just who we are, but we welcome others to come in as well. And that is what creates this whole
Bond.
It's a dynamic.
It's a dynamic.
I mean,
Penny.
it's viral. It grows.
Yeah.
And the ability not only to share, but then what do they have to add? In other words, where are they coming
Yeah.
from? And not only do we sharpen our caregiver skills in trying to help them, but every situation's different. So we learn too, even if it isn't directly related to caregiving in the moment. All right?
And that's
We hear
why-
about family
Plus,
situations.
we learn from
hear
them.
Exactly. It's a give and a take. And I think that's one of the most important things to recognize in a support group, that it is truly equality and give and take. And while there are people that may know more about something than the other person, everybody has something to share. Everybody has a perspective and an observation. The one thing that I will tell those that are watching that you can never have in a support group is anybody that's judgmental. Because what caregivers do, they do. There are very little written instructions for caregiving. And one of the difficulties that we have in caregiving is there aren't enough places to bring the caregiver up to speed and make them recognize what they're dealing with and how they might approach certain issues. So as I say, right now, we got 50 or 60 million caregivers out there, and unfortunately most of them are reinventing the wheel every day. And one of the reasons that I put together the practical planning manual that I did for caregivers, and it's a great starting place if you want to start a group, because it's bedrock information about how caregivers approach problem solving. And that's a good way to at least start into a group. And the book is available. I'm not here to sell, but you can get it on Kindle. You can get it on the caregiverreality.com website. And it's pretty inexpensive, but it's a compilation of 25 years of what I've learned and some of the others that helped me put it together. And when I just did a LinkedIn page yesterday, and they said, "Who helped you create Caregiver Reality?" And besides the few individuals, I said innumerable caregivers. And that's the absolute truth, because we all keep learning. And that's the invaluable point about a support group. And even if you start one and it sputters, don't be afraid
Don't
to
give
go
up.
back out and start.
Don't give
And
up.
even if you can't sit face to face with one another, make a conference call. Do it
Skype.
with Skype if you understand the technology. Don't be afraid to create an opportunity to help yourself and help others. And I think that's the most important thing about any group. It has to be beneficial to the people that are a part of it. Don't worry if you don't have an exquisite amount of expertise. It isn't expertise per se that makes for a good group. It's people that are looking to help themselves that make a difference, and that are the reason that we're here today talking about it. I don't think we have too much more time, but Freddie, who's running the camera, will let me know. And but I would like to get some concluding remarks out of all of you.
Well, for those watching, listening and watching, I think the first step, if you're wherever you live, whether it's a major city or a small town, because of the wonders of the internet, and if you don't have the internet, your local library, do a search on whatever situation you're in. As I said, cancer care, special needs children. I told a story about a child that was just born to my best friend's son, and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and what's that thing that yesterday was the day?
April Fool's Day?
Autism. Autism.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's everything. So whatever your situation is, obviously breast cancer is very important to us as women, but I would say that would be the first step. And that would be a start off. Maybe there's an existing group you're not aware of, and if it isn't, then, as I said, you can start a group in your living room, or you can start a
group on your phone or on your computer.
right.
All right. The whole point is recognizing that you're looking to care, you're looking to share, you're looking to learn, and you're looking to be able to support one another. All right. Pierre?
Well, I think one of the things that we learn, or we should learn, is that if your spouse or any loved one is in a facility, that it's your responsibility to find out everything you can about that facility. As I remember one of your first meetings, or one of the first times I was at one meeting, you stressed, well, like, how long are the people working there? And the first thought was, what do I care? But then, you made it plain, and it was obvious why you should know that. And I found that although my wife is not in a facility that I'm crazy for, I've done enough looking into it to feel comfortable that they're caring for her properly.
Right. Well, one of the things, and it's the bedrock of caregiving, and I say it on the show quite often, I'll repeat it just quickly here, that part of what a support group does, and a good facilitator as well, is it lets you understand what your options are, even if they're lousy options, so that you get the peace of mind that you made the best decision with what you had available at the time that you had to make it, as opposed to floundering and then questioning yourself after the fact. And there's a lot to be gained from that perspective. And one of the reasons, Marion made it clear, you start off understanding the disease that your loved one may have. That's the 15% of caregiving, because you got to know what it is. But the other 85% is really practical problem solving. My doctor can't tell me how to best assess assisted living or a nursing home, just to use that, because we speak of it quite often. But that system is very complicated out there. And there's a lot of things that one needs to understand. And even when you get to understand them, and you say, oh, I found a great facility, now all of a sudden I'm confronted with the fact that I can't afford it. All right, so what do I do now? All right, and so I may have to compromise in places. I may have to mobilize the family. I may have to continue home care longer than I would have liked, because I can't afford to do it any other way. But you make the best of it that you can, and one of the ways that you can is to understand how you work your options. What is really out there? Resources are terrific if you understand how to use them. And one of the things that the CareGiverReality.com website does is not only give you resources, but explain to you how to use those resources and what to look for.
Well, when I first started, I don't think I even used the word dementia in connection with my husband. I just thought his behavior was odd.
Right.
And he had forgotten how to operate the remote control. And he had forgotten how to work the microwave. But I knew the word dementia in the abstract, but I didn't put it
Because we were
together.
trying to put it in the context of having the flu or broken leg, which is our background to care. All
then
right, and
later
not chronic,
benefit from
long-term in moving into areas that we don't clearly understand. And that's a legitimate mistake, is understanding that you've moved from just taking care of a temporary situation that you can quantify medically and emotionally to something that is much bigger, much longer.
But I also, something we haven't mentioned, that I remember very clearly expressing my anger at the situation I was put into. Physically, I wasn't healthy, and he was constantly falling, wouldn't let me call 911, and all of this, getting up every 2 hours at night, so I never got a good night's sleep. And my anger, and I was allowed to express my anger here without any fear that it was going to be judged or that it wouldn't be understood for what it was, which was frustration. until I could put things in context and did get him evaluated and find out that there was dementia.
All right, and one needs to understand that while we're talking about dementia here today, because most of the folks around this table are dealing with it, dementia is some of the toughest caregiving because your loved one can no longer be a component in their care, and so that's what makes it even more difficult. Not that every disease doesn't present its complications, but if you can still talk to your spouse or your loved one and get a coherent conversation back and forth, it's very different than kind of getting a blank stare. And I want to thank everybody because this was a very important
I'd like to make one
group
other-
meeting,
sure.
and
Okay,
I will
sure.
let you do
Okay.
that.
The point that I wanted to make is I started coming to this group as a caregiver for my husband. He's since passed away. It's well over a year. I didn't need a grief counseling group. I just continued coming to this group. And you all helped me get through losing my husband. And that was very, very important. So support groups can go beyond their initial.
Well, rather than sitting with a
Purpose.
group of strangers expressing
Exactly.
your grief,
I was more comfortable coming
you were
here.
back with a group of people that kind of been with you all the way to the dance,
To the end.
right, and continued afterwards.
Don't we all?
And that's what makes a support group so invaluable, is because whether you're actively in a problem or some of the aspects of that problem have changed, but you have different problems, you can come back to the group and be a part. And one of the great legacies, I think, of being in a support group becomes the opportunity to give back. Just as you've said, Murray,
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
you've said it, Bernice, you've said, everybody around this table has the opportunity to not only have benefited from what the group gave to them, but even afterwards.
Yes.
It's that feeling of family and that feeling that I can continue to be supportive. And if somebody new steps in, and we certainly are seeing a lot more new people in our groups these days, is that you can look at them and say, that was probably me X years ago. And think of everything that I've been through and how I can't make what they have to do easier, but I can make it more explainable, and I can let them know that they're not alone.
That's
And I think if a support group has one aspect to it that is the overriding aspect, it's that you're not alone, and to know that you got others that are helping you pull the plow and keep a perspective so that you don't burn yourself out or get just as into difficult straits, because it doesn't do anybody any good if the caregiver goes down and now you have two people to care for. So I want to thank you so much. I thought this was a great session. I can't wait to see it and put it on the air. I want to thank Scott Solkoff for the use of his facilities, and you will see this one very, very soon.
Oh,
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Freddie Jr.
Cut, Junior.